Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So just a few more weeks before the end of the Rains retreat. I will come out of just 2 weeks silent retreat as well. So there's a few strands of the thoughts and perceptions that I would like to offer tonight. If all turns out well, I can tie it together to a beautiful bowl of Dhamma. Otherwise, we might get a tangled mess. We'll see what happens. And in this tradition, as you know, coming from the Thai tradition, Bodhinyana, and it's always been like the underpinning teaching that we receive, especially with Ajahn Brahm, is that is through peace that true wisdom arises, and samadhi is not an end in itself, while is the benefits are, beautiful, and there are many benefits. It is not an end in itself, and sometimes people do get stuck in that. And just kind of saying, as the mind was kind of settling down during the retreats, silent retreat, deepen up. Yeah, you can see things just open up. Talking about just walking around, seeing, the bush. And it's just as if the colors become, three-dimensional. You have all these kind of flowers coming out at you. Even the leaves on the ground, it's like, wow, so amazing, beautiful leaves and walking on. And it's just literally walking in some kind of deva loka, heavenly realm, something. Feeling, like I talked about earlier, feeling so blessed just to have the opportunity to practice in the forest. Just to be able to be supported by the community. And I say this over and over again, I still think it's not something that we should take for granted. That we're as a community practicing in the Australian bush, thousands of miles away from the land of Buddhism, from India, thousands of years removed from the time of the Buddha. It's an amazing blessing that we should always reflect on over and over again. Something that's not to be taken for granted, not to be taken for lightly. It's very, very precious. And yes, all of us here have a good fortune to stumble upon the teaching from different ways. And also, I guess, in terms of samsara, it's conditioned. We must have some kind of condition that has to bring us together. But if we don't, never mind. Like I said, you'll come back for another 1 billion times until we get it right. Until then, but in terms of the fruits of samadhi, the feeling of lightness, of overwhelming love for everybody and everything, it's nice. But so like I always say, always encourage to use the stillness to reflect on. And in the Theravadin tradition, there are basically two. There's a lot more, but sometimes in the way I was brought up, one is, I spoke about a few weeks ago, is the body contemplation, looking at different parts of the body, reflecting on its impermanence, its unattractiveness, its non-selfness. That's one thing, but it may not appeal to everybody. So another one was the Four Noble Truths, and that is basically the Theravadin's koan. Why am I suffering, and how to end it? It's the only thing we really need to contemplate. That's the only thing that matters. And I think these are I'll read what the Buddha has to say for himself, because some of you get a lot of paraphrases from myself, from different monks over the time. But it's great just to sometimes see what the Buddha actually said about the Four Noble Truths. as well, about what that leads to. And sometimes we get criticized. Like I said, with Theravadin monks always talking about suffering. That's all monks go about on the Thai first tradition, suffering. Yes, Ajahn, I've got enough suffering already. I don't come to the monastery to hear about more suffering. So, but, like the Buddha said, it is through not understanding, truly understanding suffering, that we are bound to repeat it. We're bound to cause suffering for ourselves over and over again. It is through the contemplation. And it's because suffering is unpleasant. So people want to turn away from it, want to distract ourselves with sense pleasure. But with encouragement of the Buddha, encouragement of the meditation masters, hopefully we are using the stillness and turning back, looking into this body and mind complex of ours, and seeing where is it the suffering arises? Where is it that we're making suffering for ourselves and others? And how can we learn to relinquish it somehow? What are the path? And so much of it is about, we suffer because through craving, we want things. So much of the path is about a gentle letting go, relinquishment of desires, relinquishing of views and opinions, relinquishing of a sense of self, what we take to be ourself. And when we see clearly it is suffering, that's an amazing thing. The mind lets go by itself. Nothing that you have to do. Letting go happens through clear seeing. Letting go happens through a still mind. And when you sometimes, as monks, as teachers, different people, sometimes you may choose to engage in the world. But a lot of times you see, meditation masters, they do engage, do have a full schedule of teaching, and you're thinking, why are you doing that for? Why you fill your days with so much stuff? Why are you building this silly stupa? But hopefully, from their perspective, is that, they're doing for the benefit of others, for the benefit of the generations behind them. So sometimes you do have to go back into the world to engage in it with the long-term welfare and benefit of others in mind. But until then, hopefully, as we practice, our first responsibility is to lessen the suffering in ourselves and others in our lives. Through a relinquishment, letting go, making peace, acceptance. And the Theravadin code is, and that's what Lumpur Sumedho talks about, the last 40, 50 years. Every single talk. Four Noble Truths. There is suffering. There's a cause of suffering. There is a cessation of suffering. And there is the path to the cessation of suffering. Those are the things that we can bring up when the mind is peaceful, and to contemplate different ways. Cessation of suffering, how does that come about? The full weight of letting go. What does that mean in terms of the present moment experience? How do I let go of the suffering in my mind? Is it through making peace, through the relinquishment, through not fault-finding, through just unconditional acceptance? But since this is the range retreat of love, we can flip it around. This is where I get in trouble. I'm probably not very poly. So the traditional one is, there is suffering. So we can say, well, okay, you don't want to think about suffering. Why don't we think about there is love? There is love in the world. And then the second noble truth of love is, what is the cause of love for yourself and others? What is the cause of metta, of friendliness? So hopefully is acceptance of others. Hopefully it's a non-fault-finding mind. Hopefully it's forgiveness. These are the cause of learning to have a friendliness. What's the other cause of love? I think Ajahn Khemavaro would like to call it radical acceptance. You accept, you have a friendliness to others unconditionally, not because they're your friend, not because they do nice things for you, not because they say nice things, but because they're just another being who would suffer. You offer this unconditional acceptance to all beings in the world. So those are the cause of love. Instead of the cessation of suffering, how do we maintain this? How do we maintain this mind of friendliness, of well-wishing? A lot of it is to relinquish this sense of self. So much of the self is, if you hold the self very firmly, and we do it through bad habits, through ignorance, it becomes, if we're obsessed with ourselves, then it blinds you, because that's all you see, is me and myself and my want. What do I want? Anybody that gets in the way between your desire gets annoyed. But once you have a better firm grasp of self, once you shave it away and move it out, then you can see more clearly. You see that there's a whole world around you. World of other beings. That yes, your desires matters, but so is other people's desires out there. So it's a shaving away a sense of self that we can maintain this sense of friendliness, a well-wishing for ourselves and others. That's how we maintain the love and acceptance we have. And this is where it comes together. And what's the path to the maintaining of this sense of well-being, sense of friendliness? The Eightfold Path. Or you said the Threefold Path, summarized in the Thai forest tradition of Sila, Samadhi, and Panya, of harmlessness, of restraint, and then of simplicity, of stillness. And then through that, you see clearly, wisdom arises. And wisdom has to do with the relinquishing of suffering, or the maintaining of love. The establishment of this feeling of friendliness, of well-wishing, of unconditional acceptance for yourself and others. And that's something we can maintain. It's also a good standard. Whatever you do, before you do it, you should reflect. What am I going to say? What am I thinking? What I'm doing? Is that going to be for my welfare and benefit? Or is it going to be the welfare and benefit of others? Or it's the opposite. What I'm going to say, is that going to cause people suffering? Or will cause myself suffering later? And then while you're doing it, it's also good to reflect. What I'm doing right now, is that going to bring peace and stillness to my mind? It's going to bring peace and stillness to others. And after you've done it, so to also reflect. What I just said, what I just done, what I've just thought about, is that going to bring more peace and stillness to my life? Did that bring peace and stillness to my life? Or did it not? And we reflect that and you think, oh, okay, it didn't. So maybe I should change. Next time I won't do that again. I'll do something else that'll bring wholesome states. So it's this constant reflection that brings awareness and clarity. So those are the 4 noble truths of love. Okay. Hopefully. Good thing I won't get in too much trouble because there's only about 5 people that looked at the video right now. Okay, so now to the reading. This is from, in the Buddha's words, the Anthology of Discourses. And it's the chapter 9. What's this? The chapter next to the end. Next week we might go through the last chapter. But this is the shining the light of wisdom. Okay. Just a few passages actually from the Buddhas. The wisdom as a light. There are, O monks, these 4 lights. What for? The light of the moon, the light of the sun, the light of fire, and the light of wisdom. Of these 4 lights, the light of wisdom is supreme. Okay. This one. And yes, during my retreat I did do some reading, and like I said, I'm not a scholar. I usually read just for inspiration, and it always just fills me with so much happiness and just a sense of increasing faith and inspiration reading the words of the Buddha. Because like I said, it's translated thousands of years ago, but it's so direct, so pithy, and so powerful sometimes. Reading just these the simple words, and these are like a handful of leaves. It's very beautiful teaching. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Kosambi in the Simsara grove. Then the Blessed One took up a few samsapa leaves in his hand and addressed the monks thus: "What do you think, monks? Which is more numerous, these few leaves that I have taken up in my hand, or those in the grove overhead?" Venerable Sir, the leaves that the Blessed One has taken up in his hand are few, but those in the grove overhead are numerous. So too, monks, the things I have directly known but have not taught you are numerous, while the things I have taught you are few. And why, monks, have I not taught those many things? Because they are without benefit, irrelevant to the fundamentals of the spiritual life, and do not lead to disenchantment, to dispassion, to cessation, to peace, to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to nibbana. Therefore, I have not taught them. And what monks have I taught? I have taught, this is suffering. I have taught, this is the origin of suffering. I have taught, this is the cessation of suffering. I have taught, this is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. And why, monks, have I taught this? Because this is beneficial, relevant to the fundamentals of the spiritual life, and leads to disenchantment, to dispassion, to cessation, to peace, to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to nibbana. Therefore, I have taught this. Therefore, monks, an exertion should be made to understand this is suffering. An exertion should be made to understand this is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. Okay, so that's always it was a very famous passage. Some of you might have known. Okay, so this is same. Making the breakthrough. Monks, if anyone should speak thus, without having made the breakthrough to the noble truth of suffering as it really is, without having made the breakthrough to the noble truth of the origin of suffering as it really is, without having made the breakthrough to the noble truth of the cessation of suffering as it really is, without having made a breakthrough to the noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering as it really is, I will completely make an end to suffering. This is impossible. But monks, if anyone who should speak thus, having made to the breakthrough of the noble truth of suffering as it really is, having made the breakthrough to the noble truth of the origin of suffering as it really is, having made the breakthrough to the noble truth of the cessation of suffering as it really is, having made the breakthrough to the noble truth, the way leading to the cessation of suffering as it really is, I will completely make an end to suffering. This is possible. So therefore, monks, An exertion should be made to understand this is suffering. An exertion should be made to understand this is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. Okay. So that is what the Buddha has to say about the Four Noble Truths. And as we practice, and a few days left, and like I said, I'm not kind of a jhana freak. Whatever samadhi that you have, you don't need to get into the jhanas to contemplate. Like Ajahn Tan, Ajahn Chah, many people said, just whatever samadhi you have, you can use that samadhi to reflect on the body and mind complex, reflect on the Four Noble Truths. And a lot of times the reflection on that also helps to still the mind. So sometimes samadhi and insight work together, hand in hand. The stiller the mind is, the deeper the insight. And the deeper the insight, it should also bear fruit in making the mind more still. Because you see clearly there's nothing there, then obviously the mind starts to let go automatically. It doesn't hold on. You see into non-self clearly, then what's there to get annoyed with another person? They're just conditioned. What's there to feel guilty about? You're also conditioned by everything around you. So guilt, remorse, anxieties fade away naturally. Because you see naturally, it's all conditioned, there's no self. You're not there. If you're not there, you can't do anything wrong. You can't make mistakes. If you're not there, neither are they. So how can you get mad at anybody, get annoyed at people? Because they're also not there. They're also conditioned. Wind up little dolls. Do what they have to do. So our job is not to, you realize your job isn't to set people to do the right thing, whatever that is. Our job is to offer acceptance, offer unconditional support in whatever ways we can. Offer forgiveness, offer not fault-finding mind. Bring up a sense of gratitude, a sense of mutual respect and affection for each other. Because we can't do anything else. We can't do anything else in this moment other than we are. But as we continue to practice next few days, next week, my sincere wish that we all make a breakthrough to the Four Noble Truths, the welfare and happiness of ourselves and all beings. Okay, so this is the